Supremes went green, and they ruled for global warming and against men and women in business. So does this decision ensure a carbon cap or a carbon tax in our future? I think, by the way, the problem may well be solar warming rather than global warming. Well, here to debate is Dean Baker, co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, and Christopher Horner, senior fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, author of the Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming and Environmentalism. Dean, welcome back. Look, I think the Supremes overstepped in a lot of ways, and one of them was mandating this global warming as man-made. There's a lot of evidence now. Look, the Danish Meteorological Institute, NASA in the USA, the Hoover Institute of Stanford, they say the sun is getting hotter. That is causing the Earth to get warmer. That is causing Mars and Jupiter to get warmer. And that, rather than carbon dioxide and man-made efforts, is really at the root of this issue. What do you think, Dean?
Well, Larry, solar warming, I hadn't heard that one. I think you might have been out in the sun too long. You know, there's quite a consensus of scientists around the world on this one. I don't doubt you might find a few here or there to take issue with this one. But, you know, the vast majority of climatologists, scientists who studied this issue agree that this is human-caused. And, you know, you keep hitting on the economic impacts. There are ways of doing this that cost little or no money. And let me just mention one right off the bat, and I think people should slap around Al Gore for not talking about this everywhere.
I'd love to.
Okay, how come we don't push for pay-by-the-mile auto insurance? As simple as it could be. Instead of you paying a flat fee, you know, let's say, use round numbers. Instead of $1,000 a year flat fee, you pay 10 cents a mile. For a car that gets 20 a gallon, that's equivalent of a $2 a gallon gas tax. We're not raising people's insurance, at least not on average. We're just changing the incentives. There are things that we could do like that that really don't cost a penny. Now, some of these things will cost. I'm not saying it's going to be a freebie. But, you know, there's a lot of things you could do right off the bat that would go a long way. They're just kind of common sense.
All right. Well, all that's quite interesting. But I'm not going to be totally deterred. Chris Horner, let me go to you. Okay. Bruce Berkowitz of the Hoover Institute out at Stanford, he says they did all kinds of studies. We simply could not find any relationship between industrial activity, energy consumption, and changes in global temperatures. He goes on to say, we tried adjusting for delayed effects. We tried adjusting for cumulative effects. Nothing worked. And they fell back on the solar heating problem, which has happened throughout history, whether or not America had industrial activity pickups. What is your thought? Could there be something to this solar story?
Well, my colleague closed by saying we need to rely on common sense, so let's look at that fiery ball in the sky. Solar activity does correlate with Earth's surface temperatures over the past century, over the century before that, the century before that. After that, the data, of course, gets a little fuzzy. What does not correlate with surface temperatures, which is what this debate is about for some reason, it's an atmospheric theory, but okay, I'll play along, is either CO2 emissions or CO2 concentrations. We know this, okay? World War II, let's start at September 1st, 1939. Was there a warming? A few more years, and then it cooled for 3.5 decades, enough that we got panicked and spent billions of dollars on satellites to measure the atmosphere, how much it was cooling. It turns out it's neither cooling nor warming. The fact is that CO2 concentrations do not correlate with temperature. This is a fool's errand, but okay, it's the law of the land, as the president said today. We need to stop pretending that the laboratories of bureaucracy over in Europe are not making a hash of things as they try to figure out how to reduce CO2 emissions. Europe's CO2 emissions are increasing at a faster rate than the U.S. since Kyoto was agreed in 1997, and the gap is widening even faster since 2000. And we are receiving, but not for much longer, Europe's Kyoto jobs. I want everybody to remember that Acerinox, the world's second largest stainless steel manufacturer, CEO Victoriano Munoz said, no more investment in Europe. I'm sending my jobs to South Africa and the U.S. Carroll County, Kentucky has 175 Kyoto jobs, but we better not get used to it because we're going to play these games.
Let me get Dean in. Hang on. Dean, let me just ask you, does this Supremes ruling, does it force, essentially, carbon caps and or carbon taxes? Does it force 1990 Kyoto levels, which I and others think would be an industrial and employment disaster? Where does this lead? Because according to the court decision, EPA can rule against the idea of man-made global warming, but I think they're not likely to. So what's going to take us?
Well, this puts it back on the agenda, furthers on the agenda. I mean, barring congressional action, I mean, no one expects that we're going to see President Bush's EPA put on carbon tax unilaterally. They probably don't even have the authority to do that. But again, it pushes it back on the agenda. You know, in terms of, you know, us gaining jobs at yours' expense, we lost 3 million manufacturing jobs, you know, in the last 7 years. So I'm not quite sure how we did that. But in any case,
you know, Europe didn't?
No, they didn't lose 3 million Nothing
Well,
like
obviously
that.
they're
Nothing,
smaller than we are.
Nothing like. No.
We're
Europe as a
taking
whole is
their
actually
manufacturing
larger
base.
than we are, but
Well, yeah,
that's
the
aside the point.
economy is larger, but not the manufacturing base. Look,
Yes,
we're
it
taking
is
Europe's
actually. They have a
job.
larger share of manufacturing in their
Taking Europe's
economy than
jobs
we
because of
do.
this.
Taking Europe as a whole.
I named specifics. I await yours.
What specifics did you name?
Here we go again. Acerinox, the world's second largest stainless steel manufacturer, has opened a plant in Carroll County, Kentucky.
I'm sure there
the CEO
has been
said 175 jobs expressly because they have brownouts, 72% increase in electricity prices. When they get the juice delivered, he said, I can't produce steel here. I'm going places where they don't play political games with carbon.
Well, what
which
happened?
was the United
That's
States.
what the person said. By the way, we've had brownouts in California. You might not be old enough to remember it happened in 2000. But again, getting back to this puts it on the agenda.
You're going to get an awful lot more.
This simply puts it on the agenda, and there
nation.
are ways in which we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions substantially. Again, at very little cost. You know, Larry, you don't think it was a big cost to have us fight the war in Iraq? Suppose we took the $130 billion a year that we're spending on the war. We use that money to pay people to get fuel-efficient cars, fuel-efficient appliances. We don't have to put a cap on. We'll just pay
I don't
people
think
money
there's,
for that.
as you
let me
know,
make a
Dean,
point
I
about
don't
that.
believe for 1 minute that there's any limitation to the price I am willing to pay for security and freedom. But I want to go back to this issue of the economic. Look, they're talking about, obviously, automobile standards would have to be raised substantially. But other industries, coal-powered utilities, oil production, steel, building materials, airlines, okay, those are big issues, Chris Horner. Is that where this is going to lead into what a general sweep towards carbon caps and or taxes based on evidence which I still believe is not conclusive?
The good news is it will take long enough that we will finally realize, particularly when we see the price tag, that it hasn't warmed since 1998, which obviously flies in the face of the theory, but is again consistent with the sun getting into a quiet period. My colleague mentioned Iraq. The Clinton administration estimated the cost of the Kyoto Protocol, U.S. alone, at up to 4% of GDP or $400 billion per year. Put it in context, that's 5 times the cost of the Iraq War every year for an undetectable climatic benefit. So if you want to know specifically what would happen, remember, Europe's CO2 emissions are rising faster than ours, but they're driving investment away with these policies. Look over there. The chlorine industry, the chemical industry, the steel industry,
the Clinton administration had a whole
energy
range of estimates. Some of their estimates were half of 1% GDP, less than half the cost of the war in Iraq.
So Clinton was lying. He was
He had a range of estimates. You understand that. You understand how economics works. We don't have certainty. You might, but the fact is we had a range of estimates. Some were 4%, some were half of 1%.
But when you cite future temperatures, you only cite the high one. And
I didn't cite any estimate. Excuse me.
I'm talking about you alarmists out there. You only pick the high one, and I'm pointing out the high cost.
All right, just as a referee, I didn't hear him cite the climate evidence. He's just saying the economics may not be as bad as I fear. Fellas, can I just get a quick one on the way out? Dinah asked this. Is the global warming question something the Supreme Court should have decided on? Dean Baker, yes or no?
They simply said it was in the EPA's domain, and I think that was the right call.
Chris Horner, yes or no? The Supreme's on global warming?
No, they shouldn't have said Massachusetts is being swallowed by sea level rise. I just took my son to the same beach I went to 40 years ago, and it was where I left it as a kid.
It wasn't swallowed by the sea rise?
No, it wasn't.
I thought Al Gore, what did he say, 20 feet?
20 feet by next week.
We're dying to get Mr. Gore on this program because I admire him,
luck.
and I'd like to have this discussion.
Make him talk about auto insurance.
Auto insurance, Dean Baker. It's a very clever idea. We're going to revisit this. We've run out of time. I appreciate it, gentlemen. Dean Baker, Chris Horner, thank you very, very much. Now, we're going to go back. We're going to go back to our panel and see if this Supreme's decision has any particular impact on stocks. That's what I really want to know, and the rest of American business. And we will then discuss how we're going to try to keep America great despite the Supreme Court. I'm not sure they're doing it the right way, but I am sure you should keep it right here with Kudlow and Company. We still believe in free markets, and think about this solar point, people. Solar heat.